Hey, what's up? So I know what you may be thinking if you're not my music theory professor. Did you choose to analyze a sonata on your free time? And the answer is no. With that being said, let's get started. So, this is Haydn, who was like super famous and well off writing classical music during the 18th century. He wrote a sonata and two other movements, but then he labeled the whole package as a sonata to confuse music theory students. Specifically, this is the Sonata in D major number 50. Technically, the whole piece shouldn't be referred to as a sonata, only the first movement, which is written in sonata form. Sonata form consists of three parts, which are the exposition, the development, and the recapitulation. The exposition introduces all the themes that we hear throughout the piece. The development is the harmonically unstable zone, and the recapitulation is basically the exposition repeated, but ending in the tonic rather than the dominant. So the exposition starts in measure 1 with the primary theme. It's in the key of D major, as the piece entails. So basically, the primary theme is something that we'll hear throughout the piece, which is pretty important because it's the theme that kind of keeps everything flowing together. It's heard also in the development and obviously in the recapitulation. So then we have a transition, which begins in measure 9. It starts in the key of D major and ends in the key of A major, with a medial caesura appearing in measure 16. So a transition is basically this material that is used to lead from the primary theme to the secondary theme. It's often full of long runs, particularly this piece features 16th note runs up until the medial caesura, and then after that the secondary theme begins. So the secondary theme begins in measure 17 in the key of A major, and this theme lasts for around 16 measures and ends with a perfect authentic cadence in measures 34 and 35. Finally, there's a closing section that begins in measure 35 in the key of A major. It basically just ends this part of the piece and it just closes off everything before leading into the development, which uses the same theme as the primary theme. But the closing section also prepares you for the exposition repeating again, which in this case it does. So you have the exposition 2 times, and then it takes you into the development, which starts in measure 41. So, as I said, the development uses the primary theme to use harmonic instability and unraveling. So the keys that it modulates to are A major, G major, B minor, F sharp minor, and E minor, which are the closely related and closely related relative keys to D major, meaning that they are a sharp or a flat away, and they are either the same quality or a different quality, which would be minor. And then after the development, there's the recapitulation, which starts in measure 61. It has the primary theme in the key of D, so it sounds exactly the same. But where things start to change is the transition, which begins in measure 71. So there's 2 extra measures added to the primary theme in the recapitulation, and it's basically like showing that there are slight differences here. And this really is shown in the transition where you start in A major and then go back to D major because the recapitulation stays in the tonic, so that way you can end in the tonic. So there's a medial caesura, and it appears in measure 79. And then the secondary theme begins in measure 80, but this time it begins in the key of D rather than the dominant key of A. So there is another perfectly authentic cadence for the secondary theme ending that appears in measures 97 and 98 before leading to the closing section, which begins in measure 98 in the key of D, and then after the first time with the closing section, you repeat both the development and the recapitulation before ending the piece. So then, after the first movement, there is a second movement in D minor, which is not in sonata form as the title sonata would entail, but rather binary form. So binary form is when a piece has two sections, usually labeled as a capital A and a capital B, to show that they are different, they do not sound the same, and also they are, well, two different sections. They have completely different material. And both sections often contain two phrases, which may be labeled as lowercase a, lowercase b, lowercase a prime, etc. So it depends on like what the phrasing is, if it's a parallel period, a contrasting period. So since the two sections are different, we have to label them as A and B, particularly of the capital variety, unless you want your theory teacher to question why you exist and why you've decided to major in music. So for the phrases, you have to label each accordingly in the diagram. So the phrases in section A would be labeled lowercase a and lowercase a prime to indicate that they are similar but not exact. So basically what that means is that they're parallel period, they're very similar phrases, they have very similar material, but one may end with a half cadence and the other may end with like an imperfect authentic cadence or a perfect authentic cadence, etc. There's lots of different things that could happen there. But if you're still confused with the concept of like phrasing, think of biological siblings, which would be like A and A prime, versus identical twins, which would be like A and A, so like a repeated phrase type thing. So biological siblings look like you can tell they're siblings, but they have noticeable differences. For example, one may be taller and one is shorter, etc. But then identical twins usually look alike. They usually they have very non-noticeable characteristics to them. So like if they have slight differences, maybe it's because one's wearing glasses and like that's how you can tell. So like that's how I think of it generally, so I can get like a clearer idea. So the A section ends with a 5-7 of 3 going to 3, which means that Haydn chose to end the A section with a brief tonicization of F major, known as the relative major of the key of D minor. There's a repeat sign at the end of A, symbolizing that we need to repeat the movement, because when are we not repeating sections in this piece? Because that seems like all we're doing. And then we start section B. So for section B, we notice that the piece briefly modulates to G minor, which is the subdominant of D minor, and then it heads back to D minor. So the B section phrases would be labeled as B and B prime, since they are also similar, but they're not the same phrases as A and A prime. So the piece ends with a half cadence, which leads into the third movement, which is in D major, so the half cadence is an A major chord, and the B section shockingly does not repeat. So the diagram would look like this, basically, and it shows what measure numbers this is in, what sections repeat or don't repeat, the types of cadences, what the phrases would be labeled as. So you can see that A is from measures 1 through 8, and B is from measures 9 to 16. So finally, we go into the third movement, which is in D major and written in rondo form. So rondo form is where there is a reoccurring principal theme, which we'll call A, and two other themes, which we'll call B and C. So this rondo that Haydn wrote is written in A, B, A, C, A form, where the principal theme is heard 3 times. So section A is in D major and has 2 phrases labeled as A and A prime. Section B is in D minor with 2 phrases labeled as B and B prime, and section C is in G major and is labeled with 2 phrases as C and C prime. So the first time A is repeated, it sounds exactly the same as the first A, but the second time A is repeated, it is combined with the coda and is labeled as A prime and coda. So the second time Haydn repeats A, he's trying to be tricky and is making my life more difficult than it needs to be. Anyways, so the diagram would look like this, where A, the first A, is in measures 1 through 20. It's written in D major, and then the diagram shows basically the phrasing, how it ends with a half cadence. And then the second time, it ends with a pack. But what you'll notice is that there's repeats within the phrases themselves, compared to a repeat of the whole thing that was shown in the A section of the last piece, and this is because each of these phrases repeat. So you have to do phrase, phrase, then different phrase, then next section, and so on, because that's how it's written. So then section B is measures 21 through 40. It goes to D minor. And this one is written the exact same way, except there is an IAC at the end of B and then a PAC at the end of B prime. So then it goes back to A in measures 41 through 60, and it is in D major. And then you go to C, which is measure 61 through 80 in G major, and both of these end in PACs. So it seems like it was written slightly differently, but then Haydn was just like, well, we'll end it the same. And then finally, there's the A prime and the coda. So basically, A is written almost the exact same, except the phrase of A is not repeated the first, like there's only one time, but A prime is repeated 2 times, which is pretty interesting, the way that he chose to write that. But then after that, he basically just puts a bunch of like closing material in. So that's why it's longer. Each of the phrases before were 20 bars with an 8-bar phrase, then a 12-bar phrase, while this one is from measures 81 to 134, which is almost 60 bars worth of material. So that's really it. I'm tired and I want to go to bed. I'm 3 hours into a mental breakdown and I've almost given up 3 times. I hope that anyone watching this enjoyed it, because I realized making this video that there is a reason that I am not a YouTuber, as editing and recording and everything else is hard, but I enjoyed it. So, see you later. I hope you enjoyed. Have a nice weekend or night or day, whenever you're watching this, really. So yeah, see you around if I ever decide to come back to YouTube. But for now, bye!